Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the most basic, most fundamental processes in all of biology, reproduction. It's the very engine that keeps life going, making sure species carry on from one generation to the next. So let's get right into it. But that brings up a really interesting question. Think about it. Things like eating or breathing, well, you need those to stay alive yourself. But reproduction? An organism doesn't need it for its own survival. Plus, it takes up a ton of energy. So why on earth do living things pour so much effort into it? Let's find out. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with the blueprint of life itself, then check out how reproduction works with just one parent. After that, we'll see why having two parents is such a big deal. Then we'll zoom in on how flowers do their thing, and finally, we'll wrap up with the human story. To really get to the bottom of that big why, we have to shrink down and think on a microscopic level. Because the reason life reproduces is actually written right into its most fundamental code. The blueprint that makes every living thing what it is. And that blueprint, of course, is DNA. It's this incredible molecule that holds all the instructions for building an organism's body. So you could say the most basic, most essential part of reproduction is just making a copy of this DNA to pass on. Now, this is where it gets really cool. You've got this delicate balancing act happening. If DNA copies were perfect every single time, a species would be super stable, perfectly suited for its environment. But what happens if that environment changes? That's where imperfect copying is actually a good thing. Those tiny little errors that pop up when DNA is copied, that's where we get variations. And these variations are absolutely crucial for the survival of a species, giving it the tools to adapt when things get tough. Okay, so let's move on and see how life puts this into practice. First up, we're going to look at the simplest strategy out there, asexual reproduction, where it only takes one parent to create a whole new generation. The most straightforward method has to be fission. You can see it here with this amoeba. A single cell just grows and then splits right down the middle into two. It's super direct, super efficient, and you end up with a new individual that's basically a perfect copy of the parent. Some organisms take this idea to a whole other level. This little guy is a Planaria, a type of flatworm. And what's wild is if you cut it into pieces, each and every piece can regrow into a complete new worm. This is called regeneration, and it's just an absolutely incredible show of what cells can do. And check this out. Another fascinating method is budding. With Hydra here, a little outgrowth, or a bud, just starts forming on the parent's body. It grows into a tiny, complete version of the parent, and then it just pops off to start its own life. And finally, there's spore formation. You've probably seen this yourself on old bread. That's rhizopus, the bread mold. Those tiny black dots are full of spores. Each spore is like a tiny little survival pod with a tough wall, just waiting for the right moist surface to spring back to life. So asexual reproduction is fast, it's simple, but remember what we said about variation? Relying on just those slow, random copying errors to create variety? That takes a long, long time. So what if there was a faster way? This is where sexual reproduction, with two parents, comes in and completely changes the game. Okay, so let's break this down. It all comes down to the trade-offs you see in this table. Asexual reproduction, it's great if your environment is stable. It's fast, doesn't cost a lot of energy, and hey, if the parent is doing great, why change anything? But sexual reproduction, even though it's slower and more costly, has this one massive advantage. It creates a ton of genetic variation by mixing DNA from two different parents. It's like constantly shuffling a deck of cards, which acts like an evolutionary insurance policy for the whole species.
And to see this in action, let's look at one of the most beautiful examples of sexual reproduction out there, flowering plants.
So here's a look at the key parts inside a flower. You've got the stamen, that's the male part that makes the pollen, and then right in the middle you have the pistil, that's the female part, holding the ovules which will eventually become seeds. For anything to happen, these two have to meet. The whole thing is this amazing four-step journey. First, pollen has to get from the stamen to the stigma, that's pollination. Then a tiny tube actually grows from that pollen grain all the way down to the ovary. After that, the male germ cell travels down the tube and fuses with the female egg cell to create a zygote. And finally, that little ovule turns into a seed, and the ovary around it becomes a delicious fruit. All right, and now let's bring it all home and talk about how sexual reproduction works in our own species, which, as you know, involves a pretty significant period of change and development. So, after that fast growth spurt in childhood kind of slows down, a whole new phase of change kicks in. This is puberty, and it's basically the time when the body's reproductive systems start to mature. It's a whole series of gradual changes. Some are common for everyone, like new hair growth or oilier skin, and some are specific to either females or males, all thanks to a new rush of hormones. This whole maturation process involves two different but perfectly complementary systems. You have the male reproductive system, which is built to produce and deliver sperm, and then you have the female reproductive system, which produces eggs and is uniquely designed to receive sperm and then nurture a developing embryo. A truly crucial part of that whole nurturing process is the placenta. See, after an egg is fertilized, the embryo settles into the wall of the uterus. Then the placenta forms, and it acts as this vital bridge. It lets nutrients and oxygen pass from the mother's blood to the embryo, and waste go the other way, all without their blood ever actually mixing. It's a pretty remarkable life support system. But of course, fertilization doesn't happen every single time. Every month, the uterus gets ready for a potential pregnancy by building up this thick lining rich with blood to nourish an embryo. If that month's egg isn't fertilized, well, the lining isn't needed anymore, so it breaks down and is shed from the body. This cycle is called menstruation, and it basically just resets the system for the next chance. So that brings us right back to where we started. Whether we're talking about a simple cell splitting in two or the incredible complexity of human biology, the end goal is always the same: to keep the species going. And this quote really sums it all up, doesn't it? It's those variations, the ones so powerfully created by sexual reproduction, that give a species the flexibility it needs to survive in a world that's always changing. Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If variation is truly the engine of survival, what do you think the future of reproduction might look like for all the different kinds of life on our planet? It's a fascinating question about the future of life itself.